Under the amber glow of Paris at twilight, the city hummed with 1,000 conversations. Yet inside the marble tower on Avenue Montaigne, silence ruled like a tyrant. Damien Laurent stood at the edge of his penthouse balcony, a glass of cognac untouched in his hand, watching the Eiffel Tower glitter against the darkening sky. His suit jacket hung loosely over his shoulders, his tie discarded somewhere in the shadows behind him. To the world, he was untouchable. A tech mogul who built empires from algorithms and ambition, but tonight, alone with the ghosts of his choices, he felt like nothing more than a man who had forgotten how to breathe. Inside, the apartment gleamed with cold perfection. White marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the chandeliers that hung like frozen tears from the ceiling. Everything had its place. Everything existed without warmth. It was a museum of success. Damien was its most carefully curated artifact. Camille Dubois moved through the space like a whisper. She had worked here for nearly 8 months, arriving each Tuesday and Friday evening to restore order to a life that never seemed disordered. Her uniform was simple, pressed navy fabric and sensible shoes that made no sound against the stone. She kept her dark hair tied back, her eyes lowered, her presence deliberately invisible. That was the rule for people like her. Exist, but do not intrude. Serve, but do not speak unless spoken to. She had learned these rules young, working her way through university by cleaning the homes of people who would never remember her name. Now, at 27, she carried them like armor. It was easier to be invisible than to risk being seen and found wanting. Tonight, something felt different. The air inside the penthouse held a weight she could not name. Damien had not acknowledged her arrival, which was not unusual. But as she moved through the kitchen, gathering the dishes he never seemed to eat from, she heard it. A sound so faint, she almost missed it. A sharp intake of breath, followed by silence that felt too heavy. She paused, her hand hovering over a crystal glass. The sound came again, ragged and uneven, from the direction of the living room. Camille set down her tray and moved quietly toward the archway. Uncertainty tightening in her chest. What she saw stopped her completely. Damien Laurent, the man whose face graced magazine covers and business journals, was on his knees in the center of the room. His hands pressed flat against the marble floor, his chest heaving as though the air itself had turned to stone in his lungs. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something only he could see. The cognac glass lay shattered beside him, amber liquid spreading like a wound across the white stone. Camille's first instinct was to leave. This was private. This was not her place. But then his hand moved to his chest, fingers clawing at his shirt. And the sound that escaped his throat was not anger or frustration. It was fear. Raw, unfiltered human fear. Her training told her to step back. Her heart told her something different. She moved forward slowly, her footsteps deliberate now so as not to startle him. When she was close enough, she knelt down, careful to leave space between them. Her voice, when it came, was steady, despite the trembling in her hands. "Monsieur Laurent, can you hear me?" His eyes flickered toward her, wild and searching. For a moment, she thought he might tell her to leave, to forget what she had seen. Instead, his lips moved, forming words that barely carried sound. "I cannot breathe." Camille recognized this. She had seen it before, years ago, when her younger brother Vincent would wake screaming from nightmares after their father left. Panic attacks, the doctor had called them. Moments when the mind convinced the body it was dying, even when there was no danger. "You are safe," she said quietly. "I know it does not feel that way right now, but you are safe. Can you try to breathe with me?" "Slowly. In through your nose." She demonstrated her own breath, calm and measured. Damien watched her as though she were speaking a language he had forgotten. His chest rose, shallow and jerky, but it rose. "Good. And now out through your mouth." Like blowing out a candle, he exhaled, the sound still ragged, but less frantic. Camille continued, her voice a soft anchor in the storm of his panic. She did not touch him, did not reach for him, just stayed there, breathing in rhythm until his own breath began to match hers. Minutes passed. The panic did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. Damien's hands unclenched slowly, falling away from his chest, to rest against his thighs. His head bowed forward, exhaustion replacing terror. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. Camille nodded, though he was not looking at her. She rose carefully, intending to fetch water, but his voice stopped her. "Please, do not go yet." She hesitated, then lowered herself back down, this time sitting on the floor a few feet away. The shattered glass glittered between them like stars that had fallen and broken. "What happened?" she asked gently. He laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. "Everything. Nothing. I do not even know anymore." He lifted his head, and for the first time since she had started working for him, he truly looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. "Who are you?" "Camille Dubois. I have been cleaning your home for 8 months. Its expression flickered with something like shame. 8 months, and I never asked your name. You were not required to. It does not make it right." Silence settled between them, but it was not the cold silence that usually filled this place. It was something softer, more honest. "Why did you help me?" he asked. Camille considered the question. "Because you needed help. And because I know what it feels like to believe you are drowning in a room full of air." Damien studied her face, searching for judgment and finding none. "You do not think I am weak?" "I think you are human," she said simply. "And humans break sometimes. It does not mean we are weak. It means we have been strong for too long without rest." He closed his eyes, and she saw his shoulders sag as though releasing a weight he had carried for years. When he opened them again, there were tears there, unshed but present. "No one is watching now," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Maybe it is time to tell the truth." Camille did not ask what truth he meant. She simply stayed there, a silent witness to whatever confession he needed to make, knowing that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop pretending everything is fine. The Eiffel Tower continued to sparkle outside, indifferent to the small moment of humanity unfolding in the shadows. And in that moment, two people who existed in different worlds found themselves sharing the same breath, the same silence, the same fragile hope that perhaps they did not have to carry their burdens alone. The following weeks unfolded like pages in a book Damien had never intended to read. Camille continued to arrive on Tuesdays and Fridays, but the nature of her visits had shifted in ways neither of them acknowledged aloud. She still cleaned, still moved through the penthouse with practiced efficiency. But now there were moments when their paths would cross and words would be exchanged. Small words at first. Comments about the weather, questions about whether he had eaten, observations about the art hanging on his walls. Damien found himself listening for the sound of her arrival, the soft chime of the elevator, the quiet rustle of her movements. He began leaving his office door open when she was there, no longer hiding behind closed doors and urgent phone calls. Sometimes he would emerge to find her dusting the bookshelves, and he would ask if she had read any of the titles. Her answers surprised him. She spoke of Camus and Sartre with the ease of someone who understood not just the words, but the weight they carried. "You studied philosophy?" he asked one evening, genuinely curious. Camille smiled faintly, her fingers trailing along the spine of a worn paperback. "I studied many things. Philosophy, literature, art history. But studying does not always lead to the life you imagined." "What life did you imagine?" She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to teach. To help young people understand that there is beauty in questions, not just answers. But my mother became ill during my final year at university. Medical bills do not wait for dreams to be fulfilled." Damien felt something twist in his chest. "Your mother. Is she better now?" "She passed away 2 years ago. But by then, I was already on a different path." There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. Sometimes we choose our lives. Sometimes our lives choose us. He wanted to say something profound, something that would acknowledge the sacrifice she had made. Instead, he simply nodded, understanding in a way he had not expected. "I know something about paths we do not choose." Camille tilted her head, inviting him to continue without demanding it. "My father built this company," Damien said, gesturing vaguely at the walls around them as though they represented everything he had inherited. "He built it with vision and passion. When he died 5 years ago, everyone expected me to step into his shoes seamlessly. The board, the investors, the media, they all wanted me to be him. But you are not him. No, I am not. He moved to the window, his reflection ghostly against the darkening sky. I am good at what I do. I understand technology, innovation, growth. But my father understood people. He knew how to make them feel seen, valued, important. I know how to make them profitable. Camille set down her cleaning cloth and crossed to stand near him. Maintaining the careful distance they both still observed. You think that makes you lesser? I think it makes me exactly what I feared becoming. A man who measures worth in numbers. And yet, she said softly, you remembered my name after one conversation. You asked about my mother? You notice when I am here? She paused, choosing her words carefully. Perhaps you understand people more than you believe. You have just forgotten to see yourself as one of them. Damien turned to look at her fully. In the dim light, she seemed less like the invisible maid and more like someone who had always been there, waiting for him to finally notice. Why do you say things that make me think? Because thinking is not the enemy. Thinking without feeling is... He laughed softly, surprised by the sound of it. You should have been a philosopher. Perhaps I still am. I just practice it while dusting. That night, after Camille left, Damien did something he had not done in years. He pulled out a box from the back of his closet, one he had sealed after his father's funeral. Inside were letters, photographs, and journals. His father's handwriting covered page after page, documenting not business strategies, but thoughts about life, family. Purposed one entry caught his eye, dated just weeks before his father's heart attack.
Oh.
Damien called today. He sounded tired. I worry he is becoming what I was before I learned to stop. Before I understood that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. I hope he finds someone who shows him that being human is not a weakness. It is the only strength that matters. Damien read the words 3 times, feeling them settle into his bones like truth he had been running from. His father had seen it, had known. And now, years later, a woman who cleaned his floors was showing him the same thing. The next Tuesday, Camille arrived to find flowers on the kitchen counter. Simple wildflowers in a glass vase, nothing extravagant. Beside them, a note in Damien's precise handwriting. For seeing what I have refused to see. Thank you. She touched the petals gently, a small smile playing at her lips. When Damien emerged from his office later, she was still there, arranging them more carefully. They are beautiful, she said without turning. They reminded me of something my father used to say, that the most valuable things in life are the ones that do not announce themselves. They simply exist, quietly making everything better. Camille met his gaze, understanding passing between them like a secret language. Your father sounds like he was wise. I wish I had listened more when he was alive. You're listening now, she said. That is what matters. Over the following weeks, their conversations deepened. Damien learned that Camille had a younger brother who worked as a nurse, that she loved early morning walks along the Seine when the city was still waking, that she believed in second chances even when the world insisted on first impressions. She learned that Damien played piano but had not touched the keys in years, that he dreamed of creating technology that helped people connect rather than isolate, that he carried guilt like a stone in his chest for never telling his father he was proud to be his son. One Friday evening, as rain drummed against the windows, Camille found Damien sitting at the grand piano in the corner of the living room. His fingers hovered over the keys but did not press down. Do you still play? She asked quietly. I've forgotten how. She moved closer, her presence a gentle invitation. Music is like breathing. Your body remembers even when your mind pretends to forget. He looked up at her, vulnerability clear in his eyes. What if I play and it sounds wrong? What if I've lost it completely? Then it will sound wrong, and you will try again. That is how we find our way back to the things we love. Damien let his fingers fall onto the keys, and a single note rang out, pure and clear. Then another, and another. The melody was hesitant at first, stumbling over itself, but gradually it found its rhythm. Camille recognized it. Clair de Lune. The music filled the space, transforming the cold marble and glass into something that felt almost like home. When he finished, his hands trembling slightly, Camille spoke softly. "You did not lose it. You only misplaced it for a while." He turned on the bench to face her, and in that moment, the carefully maintained distance between them felt less like protection and more like pretense. "Camille, I need to tell you something." She waited, her heart beating faster than it should. "These past weeks, having you here, talking with you, it has reminded me of who I wanted to be before I forgot that wanting mattered. You make me feel like I am not just a collection of responsibilities and expectations. You make me feel human. You are human, Damien. You always have been. Then why does it only feel real when you are here?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was quite ready to name. Outside, the rain intensified, creating a curtain that separated them from the rest of the world. Camille took a small step forward, closing some of the distance. "Because sometimes we need someone else to hold up a mirror before we can see ourselves clearly. I am just the mirror. What you see has always been there. And what do you see when you look at me?" She considered this, her eyes never leaving his. "I see someone who is trying very hard to be perfect instead of happy. I see someone who is afraid that if he stops achieving, he will disappear. But mostly I see someone who is tired of being alone in a room full of everything except what matters." Damien stood slowly, closing the remaining distance until only breath separated them. "What matters, Camille?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Connection, truth, the courage to be broken in front of someone and trust they will not look away. Broken in front of you many times. Now, and I have never looked away." A confession settled between them like a promise. Neither had intended to make, but both understood completely. In that moment, Damien realized he was falling. Not in the way the business journals described market crashes or stock plummets, but in the way poets wrote about when they spoke of losing yourself to find something greater. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling as they found hers. "No one is watching now," he said softly, echoing the words from that first night. "Tell me who you really are." Camille's eyes glistened. "I am someone who has spent years being invisible because I thought that was safer than being seen. I am someone who stopped painting because I convinced myself beauty was a luxury I could not afford. I am someone who watches you struggle with loneliness and wishes I could tell you that you do not have to carry it alone." "Why do you not tell me?" "Because maids do not fall in love with billionaires. Not in real life. Not in ways that end without someone getting hurt." The words were out before she could stop them, hanging in the air like a confession she could not take back. Damien's grip on her hand tightened, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And if I told you I have been falling too? That every Tuesday and Friday I find excuses to be home because the apartment feels less empty when you are in it. What then?" Camille closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over. "Then I would say we are both foolish. That the world will not understand. That there are 1,000 reasons this cannot work. And yet here we are. And yet here we are." The rain continued its rhythmic drumming. And somewhere in the distance, the city lived its 1,000 lives. Indifferent to the two people standing in a marble tower, holding hands like children afraid of the dark. Tomorrow would bring complications, questions, judgments. But tonight, in the space between who they were supposed to be and who they actually were, Damien and Camille allowed themselves to simply be two people who had found something unexpected in the emptiness. Something that felt remarkably like hope. The transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded slowly, like spring arriving after a winter that had lasted too long. Damien began to change, not the sharp, dramatic change of a man having an epiphany, but the subtle, a steady change of someone learning to see the world through different eyes. He started by doing something he'd never done before. He asked Camille to stay beyond her scheduled hours, not to clean, but simply to exist in the same space. They would sit together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in a small apartment in the Marais, where the walls were thin and the neighbors were loud but kind. He told her about boarding schools in Switzerland where silence was mandatory and kindness was viewed as weakness. I envied people like you, he admitted one night, surprising himself with the honesty. People who seemed to understand how to live without constantly performing. Camille had smiled at that, sad and understanding. And I envied people like you. People who seemed to have choices. But we were both wrong, were we not? You were trapped by expectations. I was trapped by necessity. Different cages, same loneliness. That conversation led to others. About his mother, who had died when he was 12. Leaving him with a father who showed love through providing rather than presence. About her father, who had left when she was 8. Teaching her that people who claim to love you can still choose to disappear. About the ways they had both learned to protect themselves by becoming smaller, quieter, less demanding. But something shifted as the weeks passed. Damien found himself wanting to be more, not less. He started small. He visited the company headquarters and walked through departments he normally bypassed, learning the names of people who had worked there for years without ever meeting him. He asked about their lives, their families, their hopes beyond their job descriptions. Some were suspicious at first, wondering if this was some new corporate tactic. But gradually, they softened, surprised by the genuine interest in his questions. One afternoon, he returned to the penthouse and found Camille staring at the bare wall in the hallway, her expression distant. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She turned, startled. "I was thinking this wall would be beautiful with art. Real art, not just expensive pieces chosen by decorators. Something with soul." "What kind of art?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "There is a community center in my neighborhood. Local artists display their work there. People who paint because they must, not because galleries demand it. Their pieces have stories. They have heart." The next Saturday, Damien did something unprecedented. He canceled his standing golf appointment with investors and asked Camille to take him to this community center. She looked at him with surprise and something close to fear. "What? You do not have to do this," she said. "My world and your world, they do not mix easily." Then perhaps it is time they did. The community center was nothing like the galleries he was used to. The building was weathered, the paint peeling, the floors scuffed from years of use, but inside, the walls blazed with color. Paintings hung in clusters, some in frames, some simply tacked up with care. Sculptures made from recycled materials stood in corners. Photographs captured moments of ordinary beauty. Children laughing, old hands holding coffee cups. Light falling through broken windows, Damien walked slowly through the space, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with profit margins or market shares. He felt wonder. An older woman approached them, her paint-stained apron, suggesting she was more than just a visitor. "Camille, it has been too long." "Madame Rousseau." Camille embraced her warmly. "This is Damien Laurent. I wanted him to see what you have all created here." The woman's eyes assessed him shrewdly, taking in his expensive coat and polished shoes. "A patron of the arts?" "I am trying to be," Damien said honestly. Madame Rousseau laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "At least you were honest about your ignorance. That is more than most wealthy people manage. Come, let me show you something." She led them to a painting in the back corner. It showed a woman cleaning an office building at night, the city lights beyond the windows making her silhouette glow. The brushstrokes were rough but powerful, capturing both the loneliness and dignity of invisible labor. "This was painted by Camille," Madame Rousseau said softly. 3 years ago, before life demanded she stop dreaming." Damien turned to Camille, who stood with her arms wrapped around herself, her cheeks flushed. "You never told me you painted? You never asked what I did before I became a maid?" He moved closer to the painting, studying every detail. The woman in the image was strong, not defeated. Tired, but not broken. She existed in her own light, regardless of whether anyone was watching. "It is extraordinary," he said, his voice thick with emotion he did not try to hide. "It is honest," Madame Rousseau corrected, "and that is rarer than extraordinary." Something crystallized in Damien's mind in that moment. An idea that had been forming since the night Camille had helped him breathe. Since the day he had touched piano keys again, since he had started remembering that wealth without purpose was just elaborate emptiness. Over the following weeks, he worked in secret, making phone calls, meeting with architects and lawyers, restructuring parts of his fortune in ways that made his board members nervous. He did not care. For the first time since his father's death, he was building something that felt right, not just profitable. When he finally told Camille, it was a Tuesday evening. Rain fell softly outside, turning the city into a watercolor painting. "I want to show you something," he said, handing her an envelope. Inside were architectural plans. A building in her neighborhood, currently abandoned, redesigned as an art center and school, studios for working artists, classrooms for children, gallery space for exhibitions. At the bottom of the page, a name: the Laurent Foundation for Living Artists. Camille's hands trembled as she looked through the pages. "Damien, this is impossible. The cost alone would be, I have already purchased the building. Construction begins next month." She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "Why?" He took her hands in his, holding them like they were the most precious things he had ever touched. "Because you showed me that success is not about how high you build your tower. It is about how many people you help rise with you. Because my father would have loved this idea. And because I am tired of living in a world where people like you have to choose between art and survival, I do not understand. This is your money, your resources, and I have more than I will ever need. My father once wrote that the most valuable things are the ones that do not announce themselves. You taught me to see that. Now, I want to create space for others to be seen." Camille pressed her face against his chest, her tears soaking into his shirt. "You are going to change lives. You've already changed mine." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the rain washed the city clean. Outside, people rushed past with umbrellas, unaware that something rare was happening in the marble tower above them. A billionaire was learning to be human. A maid was remembering how to dream. And two people who were never supposed to meet were rewriting the rules about who deserved to take up space in the world. The foundation became Damien's obsession, but in a way that felt healthy rather than consuming. He involved Camille in every decision, valuing her perspective not as an employee, but as a partner. She quit her job with the cleaning service, and he hired her officially as the foundation's artistic director. Some people whispered, others judged, but he discovered that he no longer cared about their opinions the way he once had. One evening, as they reviewed paint samples for the new studios, Camille looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "What?" he asked. "I am waiting for you to wake up and realize this is madness. That you have given up too much for a woman who cleans floors and paints in her spare time." No. He set down the samples and took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Listen to me carefully. You do not clean floors anymore. You create beauty. You see people. You understand that connection matters more than conquest. And if the world thinks that makes you less valuable, then the world is wrong. But you're bored, the investors will adjust, or they will leave. I have spent 5 years building my father's company into something he would not recognize. Now I am building something he would be proud of. That matters more than stock prices." Camille kissed him then, fierce and grateful, and full of emotion neither of them could name, but both understood. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me how to see." The foundation opened 6 months later. On a crisp autumn morning when the leaves turned gold and the air smelled of possibility, artists filled the studios, their laughter and conversation echoing through halls that had been silent for years. Children arrived for the first free art classes, clutching supplies they had never been able to afford. Madame Rousseau stood in the center of the gallery, tears streaming down her weathered face as she looked at paintings hung with care and respect. Damien stood in the back. Watching it all unfold, Camille found him there, slipping her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That my father would have loved this. That I wish he could see what happens when someone shows you who you really are beneath all the armor." "He can see," she said softly. "I am sure of it." That night, after everyone had left and the building stood quiet, they walked through the empty studios together. Camille stopped in front of a painting that had been donated for the opening exhibition. It showed two figures standing at a window, the city lights beyond them, blurring their reflections until they seemed to become one. "Do you remember the night we met?" Damien asked. "When I could not breathe, and you helped me find air again. I remember, I thought then that you were saving my life, but you were not. You were showing me I had one worth saving." Camille turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And you showed me I was more than what I had resigned myself to be. We saved each other, Damien." He kissed her forehead gently. "No one is watching now, and I finally know who I really am. Who are you?" "I am someone learning to build bridges instead of walls. Someone trying to honor his father by being brave enough to be different. Someone who fell in love with a woman who saw past the €1 billion to find the broken man underneath." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I am yours, Camille. If you will have me?" She pulled him close, her answer clear in the way she held him like he was something precious rather than powerful. "I am yours too. And together, maybe we can show others that being seen is not weakness. It is the bravest thing we can do." Outside, Paris sparkled under autumn stars, indifferent as always to the small miracles happening within its boundaries. But inside the foundation, in the quiet space between who they had been and who they were becoming, two people who had learned to stop hiding discovered something revolutionary. That love is not about perfection. It is about finding someone willing to see your truth and stay anyway. And that sometimes the most important question we can ask is not who we are when the world is watching, but who we become when we finally stop performing and start living.